Welcome back to Sunday Night in America. Who needs jury trials when you have those knuckleheads? To the folks at MS Now, or whatever you call yourselves these days, the word you're looking for is homicide. There are different types of homicide: justified, unjustified, lawful, unlawful. Murder is a form of unlawful homicide. And by the way, you're not the jury, you're not the grand jury, and you're not the prosecutor. Moreover, states do not have to wait to adjudicate perceived state crimes. It's called dual sovereignty. If Minnesota state actors believe this was murder, take it to a state grand jury. See what happens. To the reporters who could not get into law school, at least watch an episode of Law and Order or something before you reach your guilty verdict for murder. If you have not seen every piece of evidence, and you do not know what was in the mind of the shooter, and you have not analyzed the reasonableness of his beliefs, then you have no business passing judgment. Joining us is former federal prosecutor and ICE Director Jonathan Fahey. Welcome, Counselor. On both sides, whatever happened to waiting until all the evidence is in to reach a verdict? I swear I don't understand this. Let's go reach a verdict and then go find the evidence later.
Yeah, this is something that's really, I think, new, because there used to be a lot of caution in the media to say, wait for the facts to come in, wait for the evidence to come in. And it is really important with these types of things that they take on a life of themselves. You know, you go back to Michael Brown and some of these other things, that the facts never really matter to the activist. And in this case, you know, this is going to be thoroughly investigated, but at least from what I've seen so far, it looks like this officer, this agent, was entirely justified, and it's a justifiable homicide because he was protecting his life and the lives around him. But they still need to investigate, and of course I'm not part of the process, but that's at least my view of this. And these irresponsible people are really doing this because they don't want ICE enforcing immigration laws, and this is a pretext to try to distract and try to shut that down.
All right, speaking of people who don't like ICE, here's the mayor of Minneapolis, and I'll ask you about it on the other side.
The intensity is caused by the unwanted, uninvited people that are here in the form of ICE. They're indiscriminately taking people off the street. They're asking for IDs and passports if you happen to look like you're Latino or you're Somali. So if you are looking to restore order and prevent chaos, there's a very straightforward antidote, and that is for ICE to leave.
You know, Jonathan, I'm trying to remember, did he preach order when Biden left the borders open for 4 years? Was he concerned about chaos when Americans were being killed by unlawful migrants? I mean, what if you look like a cop, Mr. Mayor? Are you concerned when officers are killed or injured in the line of duty? Where was all this outrage, like, during the Biden administration, Jonathan?
Yeah, exactly. When 10+ million people were brought into this country illegally, and, you know, we know from Jacob Frey, he is the George Floyd mayor when things went crazy in Minnesota then, and he couldn't control that. But what's really outrageous about what he's saying, he's like, we'll stop this if you don't enforce the immigration law. You weren't invited in. You weren't all of these things. It's like, they do not need to be invited in. And moreover, President Trump and ICE have a responsibility and an obligation. It's not an elective. They are supposed to enforce the immigration law, and they've been doing a fantastic job of it. If you look at the overall crime numbers, it speaks for itself, which is the irony of what all these Minnesota leaders and these Democrat leaders are saying. Because ICE is making their communities safer. They'll never give him the credit for it, but what he is doing is doing everything he can to shut them down, to impede them from doing their job, and it's so shameful, and it's so important that this administration continues enforcing law in Minnesota, because that's the responsibility, and they need to vindicate the fact that there's a supremacy clause issue, and they have the absolute right and authority to enforce federal law, despite whatever the locals think or want to have happen.
Yeah, take care that the laws are faithfully executed. I just can't remember where I read that, unless it was in the U.S. Constitution. All right, the Insurrection Act. Let me ask you about that before I'll let you go. It's, to me, for when states either cannot or will not enforce the law. What does it take to trigger the Insurrection Act, in your judgment, What should feds do when, as in Minnesota, they're willfully ignoring federal law?
I think right now what's been done in Minnesota has been enough to trigger it, because if there's an unlawful obstruction that makes enforcing federal law impractical, then that's enough, and they can have a declaration to do so. And I heard Todd Lyons on one of these shows earlier talking about how they normally have 5 to 10 agents out to do arrests, or 5 to 6, but because of all of the obstruction going on in Minnesota, they need 10 to 15 agents per arrest, because they need agents to protect other agents. So I think we're there right now. President Trump's been very patient, but these leaders in Minnesota, it would be different if they were cooperating and trying to stop this, but in fact, they continue to fight against the federal government and ICE.
All right, Jonathan, I want you to do some pro bono work. I want you to call Mayor Fry and let him know the feds actually don't need his permission to enforce federal law in Minnesota. He seems to be under some misapprehension about that. Jonathan Fahey, thank you for joining us on the Sunday night and for your service to the country.